we really wanted to answer questions that we didn't have the time, energy, space to do. So we've got 23 questions that we pulled from your questions, and we're going to go through them today. So this is a bonus session. If you're reading the book, we just wanted to remind you that every single chapter has common Q&A. So we not just predicted, we have studied paraprofessionals for many, many years and pulled the most common questions people had to each of the topics. And so in the book, you'll see question and answers that would probably be very useful in your job. We did a little opening, and now we're going to jump into question and answer. Notice our agenda is really pretty tight today.
There's already time to go.
Thanks so much. No. Quick question, and we're going to go quick answer. We have 23, and we're going to move. First question, sometimes waiting. So this is about course 1. Sometimes waiting makes me feel like I'm not doing my job. It's hard to know when to help and when to wait, and how do I figure that out? I loved this question. And what we decided to put in the answer is wait time is essential. It is a skill to practice for you. And I often don't intervene for 5 to 10 seconds, and I mean real seconds. The other thing I like to do if I'm supporting and I really want to help, but I know it's better to wait, is I'll figure out what to do with myself instead of directly helping. So when I'm supporting a kid and I'm working on their independence, I will be counting in my head for a minute, and then I'll say, you know what, Julie? Go engage with other kids. Turn your body and go join another group. Double check with other kids, and I'll start to float. And that naturally involves me in some other helping activity so that I'm giving this kid more time to think. And then teach the skill of, and I just left it there, teach the skill of waiting, teach the skill of asking, teach the skill of seeking help. All those things are skills. And so you don't just only wait, you have to make sure to teach the skill of, and whatever that is, and then create that fading plan and data collection system. Those really help me make sure that I'm thinking about this student's independence instead of just, I'd rather help, or I can jump in here because it won't be a problem. I work on that data collection. Kristie, you want to share anything else that comes to mind?
I was going to give you a couple of things. So kids who suffer or struggle with processing time may need 30 to 60 seconds. You may remember when we counted and how long that was. So remember when Julie says literally count, that's what you got to do. That said, I think sometimes you all hear shark music because you're afraid that people think you're not doing anything. So that's that. Create a plan that's shared with everyone, that they know that while I'm here, I'm actually teaching independence. By doing nothing but waiting and holding space, I'm actually teaching. And you might need to make those connections for people. That's all I had to say.
Beautiful. Question 2, and I love people's comments, and we're reading them along the way. Question 2 is, I would love to know how to support a student who's more severe in the inclusive classroom. And this is the article that Gail referenced. We connected an article that is really well used, and this is the big important piece of it. These are the 4 steps in including a student with more significant needs. I see people leaning forward, so it might be too small, and I don't know how to make it bigger, but it's nice to see you all up close.
It's in the handout.
It's in the handout.
With titles.
Yeah, just really quickly, when you're working with a student with more significant needs, you first look at the learner and the environment. You look at their strengths, abilities, needs, and goals, and then what is happening in the environment, right? Their step 2 is what's the discrepancy between the two. So what are the required activities in the environment, and how does the student perform in the environment? So what are the discrepancies? Then when there's a discrepancy, or I'll use a good example. I was working with Claire. She's a high school student, and she was supposed to be going through the lunch line. She has cerebral palsy. She doesn't go through a lunch line. She can't hold her tray. The discrepancy is can't hold her tray, right? Everyone else in the room can hold their tray. So my options, that's the discrepancy. That's the problem. My options are teach her to directly do it. Well, here's the news. Claire's never going to learn how to do it. I can use an instructional adaptation. I could use assistive technology, or I could omit the task, okay? Omitting the task in this case would be very possible. So I could say, you know what, I'm just gonna get her tray and then set her. But instead, we decided to use technology. It's not technology, but we used something else, which is she could ask for her lunch in a bag. She can hold her bag, right? So she would say, can I have my lunch in a bag? And then she could hold her lunch and head to her table without my support any longer. So whenever there's a discrepancy, whatever it is, we have 4 options. And then we implement and evaluate. I know this is quick, but we're going to spend in part 2 a lot of time on this. And I want you to know that pretty much every time we were talking about kids with disabilities, we were often talking about kids with very significant disabilities. And so sometimes you might not have been thinking we were thinking about the same kids that we were. Kristie,
Yep.
anything else?
Very quickly on that, this 4-step process, it has a strong evidence base or research base, because even in what we know about how humans change, it's always looking at what is the ideal, which is what Julie's calling what's the learner current, let me say it differently.
Required activity.
And what's current, and what's the gap between those. But the kicker of what we know from research is if you've got the ideal, and then have Julie help me translate it, and where you're current, is that you build on the strengths to close the gap. And that's what we know from all research on how humans change.
So anything you look at, you go, oh, this student is not able to get to the carpet. So I've got 4 choices. Can I teach them to do it? Can I adapt? Can I provide some sort of assistive technology, or can I omit the task? And those all depend on the kid and their skill level. Someone asked this: what if your child, due to his disabilities, is more adept to decline instead of make progress? So this is somebody who has a degenerative disability. What is the best way to make sure he gets most of where he is now? And this was a really great question. And we started with this: start with and stay with any skills he has now. And students always surprise us. So whether or not, think back to Otto's mom, right? She heard a lot about what to expect in Otto's progress, and they were wrong. And so it's kind of like, how do you presume the best possible outcome, and watch for those skills that exist now and make sure to utilize them. Anything else, Kristie?
You're good.
Okay. Question 4, it's difficult to get students to help advocate when they don't get something. So I try to stay back and see if they'll self-advocate. What can I do to help them help themselves when they don't want to? I love this question because of the words "when they don't want to." I always assume they want to, but can't yet. And so anytime someone says, oh, there's this kid, he's not very motivated, I say, then we've failed to motivate, and it's our job and we have to figure it out. Same thing here. All the skills like self-advocacy have to be taught, and not just to students with disabilities. So a lot of times we're trying to get kids to learn how to ask for what they need. And I usually teach the whole class, and I enforce that over and over again. I'll give an example. When I taught 4th grade, the rule was ask 3 before me for every child. So anytime they were going to come ask me, where's that page in the reading packet, they would have to ask 3 kids before they got to me. And when they got to me, I would sometimes say, okay, who already tried? Just to get a sense of who did they already see. And then you reinforce getting help and receiving help in those ways.
And I'm going to add on that one that we sometimes talk about learned helplessness, dependency. You may remember those words came up in our first session. I don't remember, sorry. And what I want people to understand is that so early on, we give information to children that they don't know what they need or want or like. So we'll say, which one do you want? And they'll look at us like, neither. And we'll be like, you want the red one. And they're like, not touching it. So then we get their hand and we grab the red one. But we're saying to the kid, who probably was making a choice by not picking one of them, that they didn't want it. Or we'll say, you're not hungry, or you've had enough, or you don't need that, or you feel fine. Or you see what I'm saying? We say these things to kids after they go, I don't feel well. Oh, you feel fine. So we keep telling them not to trust what they feel inside, or to turn inward to notice what they need. And then they learn to not trust or look inside. We call it intrapersonal attunement. It's a big word, but they don't even look inside anymore. And then later we're like, why'd you do that? And they're like, I don't know. We're like, why don't you know? Well, I don't know, because you told me not to look inside and figure it out, right? It's like really complicated, but it starts super early. So we just want to make sure that when children make choices or show preferences, that those are respected, and we don't, I don't want to say trumpet, supersede it. We don't squelch it. We honor it.
Honor is such a beautiful word, because it starts with slowing yourself down, connecting to the student, what they're saying, what they're not saying by action or inaction, and then having them go inside and actually check in with themselves. So great question. Next one is, how do we handle kids that are runners or kids that have significant behaviors, hurting other kids? It's hard to walk away from them and give them space. My first question was, this was before our dealing with big emotions class, so I was hopeful that a lot of information came later. We offered a lot of suggestions there. Back to runners. When I say the word runner, and you remember what we talked about in that dealing with big emotions class, what word or words come to your mind? Like fight, flight, or freeze, flight. Runners are fleeing. It's safety. And so any kid who's a runner is running from something, and often they don't have the language to tell us what they're running from. I worked with a kid really quickly who was a runner and couldn't figure it out. So we had to put all sorts of supports in place to make sure he was safe. Later, he started lifting up his teacher's skirt. His name is Adam. Lifting up, I don't know why his teacher wore a big old skirt, but she did, and she wouldn't change her. That's what she was into. He would lift her skirt right up over her head. So you can imagine nobody was into that. It was a big problem. And every single time, if he lifted up her skirt, he would get sent out. He later became a typer like Otto. And I said to him, what was with the skirt lifting? And he typed to me, it was the only way I knew to predictably get removed from the room. And that woman's voice, that was a drill to my head. So after we taught him not to run, he was like, cool, I won't run, but how about this behavior? And everyone was like, it's sexual, he wants to see your underwear, blah, blah. No, it was that her voice was sending him straight over the edge, and it was the only way, because we had figured out how to keep him in every room, the only way he could get out. So if you have runners, they're running from something. Kristie.
We're going to start skirt flippers.
I was like, wear pants. Like, that was the solution, but she didn't like it.
You could have done that chart. Should I modify? Should I
wear pants?
Right. That would have solved the problem. So, gang, I want you to put a note in your notes someplace, or put a pin in it. Yesterday, I'm teaching another class, and a friend of mine, Laura Fish, talked about how we are attuned to people. So people were chatting, well, how do you get parents to be attuned to their kids, right? So we recorded that session. I'm going to go get it, and I'm going to put it on your landing page. So if you want to learn about what does it mean to be attuned and how you can help others do it, that's one. Two, today, my friend Barb Avila is joining that class, and we're going to talk about the safety issue that's implied in question number 5.2, in terms of if a child's hurting themselves or hurting others, what do you do because you've got other kids that you don't want to experience the trauma or to be injured, and yourself. So I'll record that one and put it on your dashboard too. So if you're curious about attunement and or keeping kids safe, I'll put it on our dashboard, okay? It's a lot at you, but I just thought there's no way we can say it all today, but I have some things at my fingertips I can add. And we'll do it in part 2 too.
What's due process? So we kept mentioning it. Due process is if there's not agreement between parents and school systems. So let's say that the parent wants their kid included and the school system says no, right? First step is mediation, which means they try to work it out with a neutral party. The second step is due process. and that heads to litigation if it's not resolved, right? Litigation, a lawsuit, something to that effect. As you well know, the IEP is a legal document, it's a legal process, and due process protects parents' rights and schools' rights so that if there's a problem, it's part of that system. And I feel like, is that enough? Kristie, was there more to say?
No, I'm glad you put that due process hearing, because sometimes people are like, is it a thing or a place? You know?
Yeah, and it's a process.
Right.
And when someone says I have to go to a due process, they mean that hearing, which is like a court proceeding, and people are sharing their thoughts. So I'm often in these due process hearings, and I'm always there because of inclusion. So almost always parents wants inclusion, school district says no. And so they're providing evidence to why they think what they think, and then a judge makes a decision and renders the decision, and then we follow that decision or they appeal it. Who is included in due process? Mostly it's almost only administrators, because this is a pretty high level disagreement if it's gotten to due process. So almost always directors of special ed, sometimes principals, and sometimes superintendents. And then if they have outside evaluators, and then families are there too. It's a pretty intense process, I would say, and unpleasant. And then usually lawyers for both sides, and sometimes teams of lawyers are there. Any other question? Not fun. Okay. And some of you might get called in to be involved in a due process hearing, usually not paraprofessionals, often educators are brought in to be asked questions, and it very much feels like a court proceeding. Okay. Somebody said, I had to leave the question, but what was the reason? They said, I couldn't stay for the whole class. What was the reason that paras weren't allowed to go to IEP meetings? And I shouldn't say they aren't allowed by rule, but they're not allowed in most school districts. And we said, because it's potentially a legal proceeding, and most districts really want those that are really trained in the law to attend. But you can still provide a lot of information prior to and after the meeting. Was there anything else, Kristie, that we said?
No, and I have to sneeze, so keep going.
Okay. I like this last class when we're just sort of unplugged. Like, okay, does the school have to abide by doctor's recommendations in regard to the student's IEP? Example, if the student has a medical issue warranting a one-to-one aid where the IEP does not have it in there. So medical doctors don't have more sway than the IEP team. The IEP team is the team who makes all the decisions. You might have a note from a doctor, a prescription from a doctor can visit, a doctor can zoom in. That doctor is just giving us information to consider at the table. And all it has to be, any outside information has to be considered, and that's it. So a lot of people will spend a lot of money on getting doctor's notes for things like that. And essentially the team has to consider, and that's it. Is present level of education
is due process only initiated by parents?
No. I've been involved in other due process cases. I'll give an example. It was a long time ago. A district brought a family to due process because they couldn't agree. The district wanted a deaf student to learn sign language, and the student was failing. The family said, no, I want him to be a lip reader. The district took the family to due process and won the case and said, we have to teach this kid sign language. And then the family pulled the kid out of school. That was what ended up happening. But that's an example of why how a school might take someone to due process.
But it's more, it's less usual. It's
98% of due process hearings are brought by the families. Are we allowed to read the entire IEP legally? Are we allowed to know the diagnosis? This one was easy. Yes. It's called right to know, and you have the right to know if you're working with a kid. You also have the obligation to be discreet and thoughtful about what you share, in the confidentiality is the issue. And so you can and should know about kids' labels and their needs, especially those that you are working with closely. You don't need to know about other kids if you're not working with them closely, but you also have to keep that confidential.
Julie, what was question number 9? Can you just show your screen again? Or yeah.
Oh, I missed it. Did I skip it? Oh, I skipped it.
One there. I don't know. Diablo. I don't know. No.
It was Ellen. I was thinking it was going to be
Oh my
Gail.
God, sorry, yeah.
Gail, I was expecting it to be you on that. Because you're good at finding typos. So present level of educational performance, is it only about deficits? No, it's about strengths, challenges, and then there's the parent information section are all in present level of performance. You might have been confused because I wrote a really silly present level of performance about me, myself, and it was all negative because I was joking about how they mostly are negative, but you're supposed to include strengths, gifts, talents, and challenges, and then parental information.
And part of this one gets a little bit confusing because there's what IDEA, the federal law, encourages teams to do and what the bare minimum is. And so the bare minimum is you have to write about the child's needs that are impacting their access, participation, and progress. So let's say Julie's a student and she only has trouble with reading. I really don't have to say anything about her math skills because I really have to talk about how reading is keeping her from accessing, participating, and making progress. That said, the rest of the story and the spirit of it is, in order to know how to best support Julie, guess what? She has to read story problems at math. And she has to read the science directions in her science class. And at PE, she has to read the cooperative learning game rules. So it doesn't just impact her during reading time. I need to see her more holistically, or I need to build upon her strengths and make sure that the family sees this as a need as well. So then you start getting more into the conversation.
Perfect. Are we allowed? Okay. Do you have tips for paraprofessionals' role if and when remote learning is continued in the fall? This is something that we have. Oh, I'm going to finish. I am sure this could be a whole training series. Yes. But I've really been thinking about what do I need to do over the summer to get ready. Kristie and I are planning to talk in part 2 about distance learning and lots of ideas and strategies. Right now, what we're doing is collecting ideas and strategies from all the school districts that we're working with so that when we get to part 2, we're going to be able to share those with you. And we're not sure where you're going to be in terms of in school or out of school. We have no concept of what that's going to look like, or if we even start and then come back, those kind of things. One thing that we've been thinking a lot about is taking any time where you're not with kids and preparing yourself, educating yourself, and spending time really honing your skills so that whenever you're back with kids, you're really doing great work.
And I feel like I'm going to say on top of that, guys, none of us have lived through a pandemic. I mean, we're all living through one, so now we can say we have, but none of us have transitioned from a terribly abrupt spring through a who knows what summer to a we don't know yet fall. So what I keep trying to ground myself with anytime I'm facing something that is so unknown is that not everything I know is unknown. So there are some things that are still known in terms of what students need, regardless of format and regardless of what school looks like. So for me, I'm going to keep grounding us or inviting us to come back to these humans still need to be safe, seen, soothed, and have secure attachments. They still need to access, participate, and make progress in whatever we're teaching students without disabilities. So regardless of the how, I want us to stay really focused on the what, so that we don't get too caught up, because it's going to change, and it may change 16 times, and it'll be different for each of us. But even the other day I said to Julie, but what about parents? Will they have jobs in the fall? And she's like, they're still going to be students. They're still going to need to be supported, and we're still going to need parents. So she was just kind of grounding me. So I hope that that we don't have the answers, but we're going to do our best to give you very practical things, but we're always going to ground you back to what is the human part of this. I don't know if that helps or doesn't help. It helps me not feel obligated to know.
Yeah, beautiful. Life still moves forward. We got an amen. I like an amen, Sandy.
Thanks, Sandy.
What do we do to process emotion at the moment? This again was done before our 3rd class. And so if you remember in the handout packet, there was a lot about how to process emotion at the moment. My favorite tiny article that I don't remember if we put up there is called Calm in a Crisis by Paula Kluth. It's a 2-page article You can Google it, Paula Kluth, Kluth. She's a good friend of mine, and she's a genius, especially around kids with autism.
I'll post it.
What'd you say, Kristie?
I'll post it.
Yeah. It basically helps you to keep yourself really clear in a crisis. And this particular question is like a full book. I have a book coming out on this called From Behavior to Belonging through ASCD. And we've got about 4 chapters on how to process emotion in the moment. So those are places that you might want to go. These were some starters, and I figure Kristie will have more. What I'm imagining is you're sitting there going, okay, this is awesome, or I believe in all this stuff, but I work with a teacher who doesn't, or who doesn't know this stuff. So I know it sounds really nerdy, but I suggest that you say, I found the very best article about. Can we talk about this? Can you take this course with me? And this is the hardest part, is to have a professional conversation. So obviously you have to be meeting about all the things that you typically have to be meeting about. But I sometimes say things like, I need 10 minutes on the agenda to talk about alternatives for whatever it is. I'm not sure what we're trying to get your teacher on board with. But in education, we have to get comfortable with professional conversations. Even if people don't agree, you can do so really respectfully. Okay, anything else?
I was just going to say, I try to draw the parallel between children and adults. So if your teacher is, let's say, being resistant, meaning closed to the idea, or has labels the kids in ways that are negative and doesn't see their strengths, okay? Just like when kids do behaviors we don't like, and we're going to say to you, ask why and why now, and be curious and open to understanding. It's going to be super, super hard, but I'm going to ask you, before you try to tell them or convince them to drink your Kool-Aid or change their behavior, pause for a moment and go, why does that teacher behave that way? Why does that teacher believe that way? And what can I be curious or open to understanding their perspective before I try to shift it? And that's not fun or easy, but it's part of the magic to help the teacher feel safe, seen, soothed, and secure, and ready to change her or his behavior. So it's just sort of practicing what we preach with children and students, which is harder the older they are.
I wish that Kristie answered that question in writing. So I wish if you could cross out the words, read articles together, take this course together, cross that out in your brain and start with what Kristie said.
Why
She's
now?
actually good at it as a human being. So whenever we've had disagreements, she's like, I'm curious about that, Julie. Where I'm like, let's solve this problem, Kristie, right? And so that answer is exactly where you want to start, is just getting really clear on where you each are before you read articles together, before you...
If their lid isn't flipped, they would love to sit down. And I think an invitation to do something collegial is beautiful. But if their lid is flipped, they're just going to be snarky with you.
Why are schools so reluctant to use peers to problem solve with a peer? My answer is I'm not sure, because I've been in districts that are both ways. Yeah. I've been in some of the best problem solving districts where they have, I'll give an example. I was watching a problem solving session. Francine is the little girl, and she's trained to sit down at the problem solving table whenever there's a challenge in the classroom. And Francine, two kids let her know that there's a conflict on the playground. And so she sits there with them and she says, second grader, and she says, okay, let's remember I statements before we start. First, and she does this, and the kid says, okay, here's my I statement. I felt very angry and I felt great when I punched her, is what he says, right? And I watched the second grader go like this. Okay, those were I statements, yes. However, and then she restates it. And I'm just thinking to myself, it's so beautiful when peers help solve problems. Some schools are reluctant. And if you're into this, Eric Carter has a brand new book about peer support, and it is incredible.
Do you know the name of it, Julie, so that Ashley can search for it?
Ashley, will you search? It's his newest book on peers.
And Julie, I got to ask you a side question, because in my Alaska class the other day, they asked me a question. I'm sorry, I'm going to digress. Sorry, guys. This is 14/A. They used buddy systems. So like older students would come and help younger students that were on IEPs, or an older student with an IEP would help younger students in the building. You get what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
And he was curious if there was research or strategies, because what his observation, this teacher's observation, was that if, let's say, a fourth grader or a high school student with an IEP was able to work with younger students or earlier classmates, they actually were calmer. And so he wondered if you had some research or some strategies about how to support those types of buddy systems, because he could see the calm and the confidence that the students that were older on IEPs gained by having a leadership role or being a buddy with a younger student. Does that make sense?
It does. And so that's often called cross-age tutoring or cross-age support. And Eric Carter is the guru of that research around why it's helpful for the helpers and the helpees. And it's really important research. And I'm seeing people are saying, people get really reluctant. They worry that someone's gaining and someone's losing and someone's always helping and things like that. We do have to be thoughtful about helping relationships and making sure that everybody has an opportunity to be a helper and to be helped. And so those are things to think about.
Yeah, and I had a doctoral student who did her dissertation on what's called peer-mediated intervention, PMI, peer-mediated intervention. It's a very strong evidence-based or research-based strategy. So that might be your way into. Julie always reminds me that when you want to change people's mindset, that sometimes the law helps them. So if the law says you have to use peers, sometimes research helps, sometimes a story, a personal experience, and sometimes social justice. So in that case, if somebody saw the research from maybe Eric Carter or others about peer-mediated intervention, but what was really powerful about this doctoral student, her name's Kathy Harris, she took children, so peer-mediated means if Julie and I are peers and Julie can't, let's say, hold her lunch tray, that I would help her learn the skill. So in that accommodations and supports graph, if you decide that your intervention is going to be to teach Julie the skill, I could be the peer that teaches Julie how to hold her tray. But what was interesting was, in this study, the students on IEPs were also the peer. So Julie had a chance, because she's really good at something else, to be my peer mediator. So the helpee wasn't always the student with the disability.
And another favorite, I was trying to Google the book. I could see that you put the book in this. What I'll do is I'll make sure to get Kristie the actual book, and it will end up on our
Landing page? Dashboard?
What's it called? Dashboard. Yeah, on our dashboard. So one other idea related to that is a lot of people are using an expert model in classrooms, and I've seen it just beautifully work. I'll give an example. So she has all the kids in a class figure out what they're good at, and she uses a way for students to figure that out. And let's just imagine that someone says, I'm a great speller, like I'm really good at spelling. Otto could be an example of someone who's a great speller. So she has an expert wall all around the room, and every student is an expert in several areas. And so instead of just ask 3 before me, you say, check the expert wall and see if you can find someone who might be good to help you. And some of the most beautiful moments have come out of that expert wall. One of them was someone who said, if you want to learn how to play chess, come see me. And they actually used that chess as a way to solve a problem in the lunchroom. And so they had the student with autism that is really good at chess running a chess table at the lunchroom, because people they were bored during lunch and they were getting into trouble. And it was the students who supported that. Anyway, what tips would you give for behaviors of nonverbal students? I want you to think about Otto when you're working with a student who does not yet have verbal speech. I haven't worked, this is truth, fact, I haven't worked with a student who did not have verbal speech that we could not figure out how to get them to communicate. And that's a really, really, really big statement to make, but true in my experience. And so I just put, we've got a lot of tips. It's pretty hard, but this is what I'm writing a book on this with Darlene Hansen, who taught Otto to type. We've got to start with presuming competence. Someone in here asked, how should I talk to kids then? Otto says, don't talk in a sing-songy voice. Start with talking to any student, any human being, the same as you would anyone of the same age. Because as soon as we modify down our voice, tone, volume, etc., we can be more clear, we can be a little more slow for kids who need to process, but we also have to talk to every human being as if they will understand bigger ideas. Kristie, do you want to say something?
Yeah, sorry, several things. Someone had asked earlier, how do we talk if kids are having trouble processing, but yet Otto was saying, don't talk down to me. And so you just answered that similarly to how I did, that we can adjust our pace or how much we're talking. I guess in theory, I could adjust how much I talk, but I don't have to talk down. So I can still use big vocabulary or technical language, and I can even make a shorter utterance. Sometimes my verbiage is one big long run-on sentence, and that's not easy for anybody. If you noticed last night when we were talking with Otto, I often would have 8 questions at once, but that's how I talk to all humans. It's not helpful to any human. So Otto just helps me remember that all humans would appreciate if I would ask one question at a time. So it's not that I'm talking down, I'm actually doing what all humans might appreciate. So it's just a nuance that's not we're saying talk like a baby or talk short or talk simply. Just do it in a way that's respectful for the person listening to you. Mm-hmm. Julie, the other thing I was going to ask you, it might have been turning lead to gold, or it might have been when we were talking about labels, but I've been trying to remember to ask you for a long time. Yeah. What you said it just now, but I think you had another phrase. When instead of saying the child's nonverbal, what is it that you usually say? I know you say they're not yet, but do you have another one?
Yeah, it doesn't use verbal speech yet to communicate. Okay. So a couple of things. Nonverbal or non-communicative means I do not communicate.
Right.
I'll use an example. I was supporting someone who bites, and I went to do an observation of this student who had bit their paraprofessional multiple times. That wasn't cool or good. And then I did an observation and watched, and I was taking data. And the paraprofessional was talking to this student, I want your comments on this. I took data, and she made up to 65 utterances per minute. The paraprofessional did. Lynn's face, that's what I was looking for, Lynn. What's your thoughts about that? Over 65 per minute utterances when I took data on that. What are your thoughts? So I want to just start seeing them in too much. Exactly. This is what it looked like. Okay, Alexa, look at me. Good. Look at me. Nice. I like your eyes. Good eyes. Okay. I can see you're paying attention. Great. Have a seat now. Sit here. Good. Put your hands here. Nice job. It wasn't as if this para was talking down to or meanly to this person in some regards, but it was way too much communication. And so we had to change everything about those interactions. First and foremost, she had to reduce her speech a ton. And then we really had to think about, what did the student prefer? The student ended up explaining that she just wanted everything written out for her. And she wanted silent support is what she called it. Having someone just have I call it a text conversation or a written conversation, is much, much easier, especially for students with autism. So sometimes I just write a note like this, looks like you're having a hard time. And then I'll write right back, right, for a kid who can write, and they will write back to me. That's way better than talking to the student directly. And so just think about all those strategies and ideas. Just hear this, not speaking is not the same as not thinking. How do you help one kid in a group who's stressed about not being as smart as the rest of the group? So learning partner or group activities, their fight or flight reacts. It tells me that we need to provide better supports and scaffolds. So yes, you're going to have kids of different varying academic levels, and we want to make sure to provide support and scaffolds so that that kid can participate. Here's an example. Everyone in the room is getting with a partner and answering 3 questions. The kid is like, whoa, get with a partner, answer 3 questions. That's too much. Prior to the getting in the group, I might have the student brainstorm the answers to the questions so they enter the group feeling more confident. I've provided the support to allow them to feel more confident. So sometimes we have to change what we're expecting. And that's my example for that. 17, I see the barrier of this in our districts. I think this was a question about inclusion, but I'm going to read it. I see the barrier of this in our district to all of this, and it's going to be a lot of work to shift those mindsets. If it's not broke, don't fix it mentality. As a para, they can't change the placement when the teachers make the decision to have a child pulled out. What can a para do? Here's our reasoning to talk a lot about inclusion and where to place kids. We know it's not your decision. It's because we wanted to explain it to you so that you understand the reasoning behind inclusion and so that you can help advocate for it, because we know it's the best way to educate kids. And we wish you had more influence in that decision, but it's true. What you said is true.
I mean, parents don't even have very much influence, and that's why we go to due process. I mean, like, it's hard, guys, but that doesn't mean that we don't champion it and work at it every day, and just know that you're not alone, that we're all doing this together.
So you'll notice this is question 18 is very much like question 16 or something like that. And it's, what do you do when a child feels subpar and not worthy of themselves? We're going to spend a long time. We already have planned a bonus session, I think, for the second class called How to Rock Behavior. And we're going to talk about using rocks as a metaphor related to what kids carry around. And we've got a whole hour planned. And so all I could say here is help them thrive through support and accommodation. So kind of everything we've put into place, just think and ask the student, how can I help you feel like part of this group? How can I help? Those kind of things. And they will give you ideas. What training is given to teachers that support inclusion? We have a book just for educators called the Educator's Handbook. So you guys are reading the Para's Handbook. This is the complimentary guide. This is really, really useful for educators. And this is what Kristie and I do full time. When we're not at home during COVID-19, we travel the country and teach schools how to create inclusive experiences. But luckily we're here together. This is a big question. What happens when behaviors threaten safety or the ability for others to learn? Safety is always first. And then I said, go to that handout packet and there's something called last resort. And that is really, what do we do when repeatedly a student is causing harm to himself or others, or herself or others? We've got a wraparound team that we were described in some full detail.
And I'll post the extra bonus recording from my group in Alaska this afternoon, where we'll talk about safety too.
So 21 is, aren't certain behaviors hard to ignore, especially when the safety of other students is at risk? We are actually not talking about ignoring behaviors. In fact, we both Kristie and I are pretty against ignoring behaviors. Instead, see every behavior as communication and support the need under the behavior. So it's a little bit different than that. And in fact, ignoring and planned ignoring is some of the worst way to support a kid. And I want you to think of yourself when you're out of control. So imagine Kristie and I are having a full-on fight and she decides to ignore me. That will increase my rage and it will increase my bad behavior. I don't know if you've ever been in a fight with your partner or spouse, and if they ignore you, does your behavior improve? Question mark. Answer, no. What messages does it send to other kids when we ignore the Chromebook thrown across the room? Do you like my answer?
There's a whole lot on this, guys. Just know that under session 4, there is stuff about ignoring and planned ignoring, so you can get really clear on it. This is all about whether you see equality or equity and your perceptions around discipline and social justice and people understanding and gaining compassion for others that have big emotions. This is huge, and we'll talk about it in part 2. Julie, some people wanted to know where the last resort, which week that was in.
Behavior, so the one called Dealing with Big Emotions. In that, there's a huge packet that is full. Like, spend some time with that packet. It's our favorite packet that we put together for school systems. And there's a section called The Last Resort. And what we mean is a student who has very significant behaviors repeatedly, and you've tried many, many things, everything in the packet, we suggest a wraparound team of support, and that's described there. And
Okay.
every page of that packet is worth, someone said, how do we prepare for the summer? Print that packet out and read it.
Tracy, while they're doing that, will you ask me? I don't know what ID is. It's a school age acronym, maybe.
Intellectual disability?
Is that what it is? Okay.
I didn't see the question, but that's what ID means to me.
ID classroom. So I didn't know that there were ID classrooms.
There are lots of ID classrooms. And one of the things that if you missed the discussion about Derek, he used to be in an ID classroom. So what most of the work that I do is really getting, moving kids out of those classrooms and into general education.
Yeah, but I thought when you had an intellectual disability, you were at the top of the food chain. You had the best chance of getting included.
No, learning disabilities first. Intellectual disabilities, emotional behavioral disorders, and autism are the least likely group of humans to be included. Yeah, give us more specific.
How to dismantle them?
No, I just, because that's what I specifically work with is ID students.
Yep.
So we are self-contained, what used to be called CDS, cognitively disabled severe.
Yep.
So, I'm just trying to see if you guys have a little bit more insight on some different strategies in an ID classroom or a CDS classroom, because a lot of this is more like inclusion, like kids in a general population classroom, which our students are not.
Good. Yes, everything can be transferred to that concept of an ID classroom. So when we're talking about challenging behavior, I'm certain that that's
yes, yeah.
Right. So we've got a whole section on that. There's a lot that is there.
Okay.
And the reason that we really focus in this way is we're talking about students that are in your classes.
Right.
In other districts, those same students would be in inclusive classrooms.
Okay.
And so most of the work that I do is helping a district, and they'll have a bunch of ID classrooms or autism rooms or things like that. And we start to really rethink those classrooms, and those very same kids can start to have access to general ed. So we are talking about the same human beings, and we will try to make sure we remember that there are teachers and paraprofessionals that are in ID classrooms alone, and we'll try to make that link more clear.
Okay.
But every time we're talking about a kid, we're thinking we can figure out how to include them better.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah,
thank you.
In our examples,
much.
it helps if they look like your world.
Yes, yeah.
Agreed. Yep,
Yeah.
that's super helpful.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.